Hi, well, welcome back to a boat called Wanda. I guess as you can hear, it's really noisy here at the moment. It's basically blowing a gale, so you can probably hear the sound of the shed just rattling away. But at least it's not cold. It's about 9 degrees, so very windy, but you know, warm enough to work inside anyway. So what I wanted to do today is to take out some of the port lights so that we can start working on the top sides. Where the blue stripe is, we need to sort of get to that area and be able to sound that back a little bit to see if there's any stress cracks under the gel coat, because there's a few sort of spiders on the gel coat there. So take out those port lights, also the one around the nav station, take that one out. They all need to come out anyway, because eventually once it gets spray painted, everything will need to be out by then anyway. So it needs to be done. Hopefully the shed won't blow down. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, so with these Hallberg-Rassy 352s, the way the port lights are configured is there's this frame around the port lights, and then this just screws in with these machine screws to a frame, and the frame's got some lugs that come in on the other side of the shell, so you're sort of sandwiching the shell with that lug in the frame and the screw going through. These screws are also of different sizes. They're from about 12mm up to about 18mm. So I guess the way it's positioned and the thickness of the shell isn't exactly symmetrical, so there are thicker screws on the top right hand corner compared to the bottom left hand corner. But the biggest problem I've got is out of the 12 machine screws here, 4 of them wouldn't come out because they've really corroded in with that lug. So I'm having to drill them out, and drilling them out is being a massive pain. Okay, let's see how we go with this one. I've just changed over and I've got a 12mm bit here, so hopefully I might be able to get some of this head of the screw off. That's going okay, but unfortunately that's going into the aluminium frame. It's really hard to get it centered. It's a bugger. Okay, so finally I got this port light out, and this is the forward port light that had the worst sort of damage to the outside of it. You can see all this aluminium's been scratched and scarred, and I guess this is where it was healed over and rubbing against the pontoon. So perhaps that's influenced why these screws were so difficult to get out and in fact had to be drilled out. But anyway, here it is. So 2 pieces. This was the part that goes on the interior. Just change the focus there. And basically it just sandwiches the shell here between these 2 pieces. So the screws go down into these lugs. And the shell is here, and it just grips onto it that way. Okay, but as I said, made a bit of a dog's breakfast with this, having to drill out these screws. I couldn't really get the drill square on because the cabinetry, I had to come in at an angle, and unfortunately that's meant that I've actually drilled into this to the sort of casing rather than straight into the screw heads. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this yet to neaten it up. I'll come up with something later. But there we go, that's the port light removed. Okay, well this is a summary of the topside repair that Anthony did, and this took a period of about 3 to 4 weeks to complete. So the starting point here is all the gel coat has been taken back by a grinder,
and where the severe impacts were, or stress cracks were, that's also been ground right back with a grinder until a point where all the fibres are sound again. So here you can see the first piece being laid, which is chop strand matting. The second piece being laid is quadaxial, which is a much thicker piece. So the chop strand is used between the laminate and the quadaxial, and then this is the first quadaxial going on. The third piece is again a chop strand mat, which is going up and over the rub rail, and you can see that they're consecutively getting wider. So this is being laid up now. Again, as I mentioned, it's going over the rub rail to give that a bit more support. Once it's laid up, then all the air bubbles are squeezed out using this roller, as you can see here. Now another piece of quadaxial, which is taking up the entire square, is laid up, and that's wetted out there and put into position. And I think following this there's actually one more piece of matting which is about to go on. Yeah, so this is the fifth layer of chop strand matting, which again goes up and over the rub rail. So there's 5 layers here. There's the laminate, there's a first chop strand matting, there's quadaxial, there's a second chop strand matting, second layer of quadaxial, third layer of chop strand matting, and then that completes the layout for this. So again, this process of laying up and putting the matting in was probably only a couple of days' work. Most of the time was spent in preparation, as can be expected. And then this is just the other side where those deep stress cracks have been ground out. You can see there's a middle section between these two areas that's been left intact, and that's because the gel coat is actually sound there, and it's used as a reference because later on when this is fed and skimmed, there's a skimming board that goes across to keep the curvature of the hull neat, and so that piece in the middle was used as a guide for that, so that's why it's left behind. Here you can see the peel ply being attached to the laminate. The purpose of this is just to provide a finer texture for the primer or filler to adhere to. Okay, once the laminate's had enough time to cure and harden properly, the next stage of the process is to apply some filler to the top sides and then skim that back to get the side of the hull sound again, or true again rather. So here's Anthony mixing up some of that filling compound, which is epoxy based, so it's suitable for above and below the waterline. And it's almost like making up some pizza dough here. Then the filling compound is applied to the side of the hull using a scraper. The trick here is to get on the right amount. Obviously you want to have enough to sand back. If you put too much on, then you just spend the entire time sanding. Next, the skimming board is used to get the side of the hull perfectly round. And again, this is a very, very difficult part where you really need a great eye to get this just right. And you can see that the board needs to be wide enough to get a decent reference either side of the part that you've just laminated up. And the idea here is to use the skimming board to get a really good shape here, to reduce the time you need to spend afterwards sanding it back, which is always by hand. And as you can see here, again, a lot of skill was required to get the right shape and to not go in too deeply. The final part of this process was to restore the rub rail, which had been badly damaged in parts and needed to be rebuilt completely. So here we can see some more epoxy filler being added to the rub rail once it had been rebuilt. And the trick here was to get the right profile back. So to do this, a board was fabricated with a cutout of the rub rail profile, and then a batten was just attached to the side of the hull using hot glue. The profiling tool was then run along this batten for a reference point, and that created a really good shape for the rub rail to be restored again. Okay, so here's the top sides finished and now ready for the next step, which is ultimately to be painted, to get the whole of the hull spray painted.
I think it might need actually one coat of primer before we get to that stage, just to make it waterproof. So anyway, there we go. There's those two patches which are now perfectly faired and smooth to be right back to the shape of the hull as it was originally. And then there's the third patch back there. You can also see the rub rail. Let me zoom in on that. So if you remember, originally this rub rail was all broken through in patches and severely damaged. Well, now that's been rebuilt and faired back and reshaped back to what it was originally. And now that's again ready to be primed and then ultimately painted. And then above the rub rail in the blue stripe, it's a bit difficult to see because of the sheet there. That's all ready to go now as well. So there was some glass laid up on that top part there, just near the tow rail. And that's been faired and sanded and is smooth again, ready to go. So there we go, you know, that's pretty much the second major piece of repair work done to Wanda. So that's great. I'm really pleased with the progress here, and I'm really pleased with the quality of the work. It looks really, really good. Really happy with the work done. Okay, so job 2, topside repair, done.